thank you very much for those who are with us. It is the last talk of what's been a very, very successful event. So thank you very much to everybody who stayed with us. Thank you very much to my good friend Charlotte Hooper from the Cyber Helpline here in the UK for having a bit of a change around with things today and being our last speaker. So thank you very much, Charlotte. And I will hand over to you for the introduction and your talk. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, everyone who's been involved in this event, for having me. I'm really excited to be here and haven't been able to attend all the talks, but the ones I have been amazing. So I'm looking forward to catching up and hearing some closing kind of thoughts from people over the next few weeks. So the purpose of my talk really is to chat you through a little bit of insights from England and Wales, well, UK as a whole, really, in regards to tackling and delivering justice from cybercrime and online harms. Before I do that, I just want to delve a little bit into the Cyber Helpline, who we are and our background, just so you can kind of get a feel for why this research took place and why we felt it needed to be done. Generally, not enough is being done to help victims of cybercrime and online harms around the world. We know that. Everyone that's here today knows that. But the question is, why is not enough being done? What are the things that need to be done to improve that system? And just as an example, the way that I got into this space was, what, 6 or 7 years ago now. And at the time, I was going into the policing sector. And this was at the time of professionalising policing in the UK. So that meant you had to go to university to be able to join the police. And very quickly, I realised that was not for me. I found that the Cyber Helpline, which had recently started, and have been there ever since. But about 6 months into volunteering with the Cyber Helpline, I found out that I'd been being covertly stalked by someone for about 4 or 5 years prior. And the way that took place was it was a complete stranger who had found me on social media. From the time I was 16, he was taking selfies that I'd taken on social media, just normal teenage selfies with, makeup and things like that. And he'd been posting them onto adult websites, as well as kind of a barrage of messages, which of course I knew about, but didn't really understand that that was stalking behaviour at the time. So my experience with law enforcement in regards to that in England was extremely poor. I was sent out an officer who had no clue what was going on. He was lovely, but he was, in his late 50s, asking me what social media was, asking me what the bunch of different sexual acronyms were. And I'm sat there as an 18-year-old, like, what is going on right now? Um, and it was really kind of a battle even to get law enforcement involved in the first place. And the only reason I managed to was because I had that background in policing. I was able to kind of advocate for myself. So with him being in a different county to me, a different area of the UK, he was under a different police force. There was a massive battle trying to decide which police force was actually going to take that crime. It was quite ironic for me that this started about 6 months into me joining the Cyber Helpline, because it really solidified for me, this is the path I need to go into. There's something that needs to change here. And whilst we are seeing some changes being made, there's still not enough being done. I'm still seeing the same problems within law enforcement and the criminal justice system that I saw 7 years ago when that was taking place for me. So the Cyber Helpline is a movement by the cybersecurity industry to try and help to fill that gap in support for victims of cybercrime in regards to the technical issues that they might be experiencing. So we're by no means, legal experts. We're by no means, mental health experts. What we are is those people that can look at evidence, look at how we improve someone's security online, trying to implement all of these things that can, help build a case, that can help to build someone's online safety back up. And that is everything from fraud and scams all the way through to stalking, harassment, grooming, everything in between. So to date, we have supported over 1.1 million people worldwide. We're in the UK and in the USA now as well. So we have where we can open free cases. I'll go into that a little bit more. We've opened 70,000 cases. And we've done that all through the power of volunteers. So we have a few staff members who are able to help with our high-risk cases and some of our operational stuff. But all of our team are primarily volunteers who are cybersecurity experts, whether they've recently graduated from university, all the way through to having been in the industry, for years and been CISOs, etc. So we've got a really great community of volunteers as well. A bit about how we help. So as I said, we help people to understand what's happened. I think that's a really big takeaway when you're working with victims of cybercrime and online harm, is it's really easy to kind of think something's happening there's somebody that's turning up at locations where I am, but how are they finding my location? Money's been taken from my bank account, but I don't know why. So understanding actually what's happening is a really, really big step in that process. We help them to contain the issue so that whilst we are supporting them, we are trying to minimize that escalation. We support them to collect evidence and report to law enforcement. Some of that will include advocacy as well. In fact, my favourite part of my job is when a police officer phones me up and asks me what an IP address is. And, explaining that it might seem like something so silly, but when we get questions from law enforcement, it's the best part of my day. Um, we support with recovering back to safety and ultimately learning from their experience. So giving that empowerment back to them, making them confident in their technology, understanding, how their security and privacy works online. We do this for a few different ways. So our helpline available in the UK and the US, but more countries to come, so watch this space. It's completely free. The help is unmetered. We have cases that last anywhere between an email to phone calls going back and forth for years, in some of our more severe and high-risk cases. We have a 24/7 intelligent chatbot that we've developed. This was before the days of AI, so it was much more impressive when I said that we developed a chatbot in-house a few years ago. So this was before that was as accessible as it is now, although we have implemented some stuff into it now to help us with our diagnosis. So the way that that chatbot works is that it's able to take a description that somebody puts into our chatbot, plain English, how a human would explain, that a cyber online harm is happening to them. And it will look to diagnose that issue for them, give them a name to it, and provide them with some guidance. We then obviously have that assisted self-help model from experts. If the chatbot hasn't answered their question, they maybe need somebody to be on the phone with them whilst they work through the guidance, whatever that might be, is available. And all of our support is trauma informed as well. So whilst our team are cybersecurity experts, they're used to in their day-to-day jobs working with businesses. So a big part of our role is supporting them in understanding, you know, the skill set is the same in terms of the technical stuff, but how do we apply that to individuals rather than looking at how we apply it from a business lens, understanding that that is someone on the other end of the phone who's, lost their life savings rather than a business that's lost money or had a database corrupted or whatever it might be. So just as kind of an overview, there's kind of 3 stages to the support we offer. That is the self-help model, 24/7 and available from our chatbot. Our expert helpline and just to mention as well, this is available worldwide. The helpline itself, like I said, is only available in the UK and the US at the moment. And then we also have our investigations team in the UK and US as well, who utilize open source intelligence, specifically in cases where we might need some extra help in supporting the police to attribute evidence to a perpetrator. So if we've got, for example, fake profiles that are harassing somebody, our team go off and try to find some evidence of who that might be, that we can deliver that to the police. And we've had some great success in that arena. It's very new. We don't talk a lot about it because if we did, everybody would want to use it. So it's been a couple of years now we've been trying in that form. So I mentioned we deal with everything. And when I say everything, I mean anything malicious that happens online, where there's anything that we can do to support. It might be illegal, it might be in that it's a harm, whatever uses technology. So what we're seeing the most of is, your hack social media accounts. We're seeing that all of the time, whether that's by a stranger, whether that is being social engineered, whether that is a partner or ex-partner, domestic cases. This is the key part of most of our cases. So extortion or webcam blackmail, online harassment, cyber stalking, of course, kind of like social engineering cases. We're actually seeing more smishing, so social engineering over SMS or messaging rather than emails. Virtual currency scams, we see a lot of, as I'm sure you can imagine, of course, job fraud, hacked cryptocurrency wallets, lost devices, investment scams, for other types of fraud. We also deal with a lot of intimate image abuse cases as well. So lots of stuff going on, it expands way beyond this into the realms of malware and things like that as well. Cyber stalking in particular is a really interesting one because it can involve, every single one of these crimes and more. And there's a lot kind of in around the cyber stalking arena that we're really interested in, and we're doing a lot of work in as kind of the technology leaders in that space, which is really exciting. Just before I go on to kind of the findings from our final justice report, as a last kind of comment, I think it's really worth noting the real impact that cybercrime has on individuals. Because even when we're seeing that people are coming to us and saying, I've lost my life savings, the financial impact, was it still up there? We asked them to voluntarily rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. We're still seeing that it's, scoring high. It has a big impact on that individual. Even when they've lost all that money, the mental health is the biggest impact in many cases. And that's, for a number of reasons. It's the fear, the shame, the fact that they're now going to have to talk to their friends and family around it. It's that impact on others, the relationships that they've built with others, their online confidence as well, deteriorating, which is massive when we're using technology so often in our lives. And of course, that sense of physical safety as well. And I think it's really important to note that these could be cases that are perpetrated by a complete stranger. Around 50% of our cases are. But around 90% of our cases say that there's been some sort of impact on their physical safety as a result of the crime or harm. So whether that is that friends or family could be at risk, it could be honor-based abuse, it could be that friend or family members involved, it could be that they're worried that they're a harm to themselves. So there's lots of different areas of impact here, and just really, really worth being kind of mindful of what these types of impact are, as I know some of the conferences have covered, but just kind of a quick recap of that there. So looking at the Fun and the Justice report. So what was this? So this was the project of my life for, 6 months or so, and was published in October 2024. So we looked at data from 2020 to 2023 across England and Wales. And the reason we looked at England and Wales, just for those that aren't in the UK and aren't aware, is that data is very staggered here. You've got Police Scotland and PSNI. So there's lots of different data sources. England and Wales is the most kind of commonly grouped together. We were looking at 3 kind of types of crime: cybercrime cybercrime and fraud. So in the UK, we call that CMA, Computer Misuse Act, and fraud. Or more generally, kind of cyber stalking and harassment, and that online harms arena. And then we had another category looking particularly intimate image abuse, because that's an area that is quite new in the UK legislation, how that data is gathered. So we took a lot of pieces of data. We submitted freedom of information requests to a number of forces. We utilised Home Office data, and of course utilised our own data as well from the 1.1 million people that we've supported, to be able to kind of build up a picture of the funnel of justice. So really, how does somebody move through the criminal justice system from the moment that they first report or even experience the crime, all the way through to them receiving justice if they do. So starting off with that reporting stage, we see that 79% of crimes in the UK are reported. This is from the Crime Survey of England and Wales. So 79% of crimes in England and Wales are reported. That is a big jump in comparison to the amount of cybercrime and online harms that are reported. It says cybercrime here, but it's cybercrime and online harms put together. So anything that utilises technology. So we're actually seeing, cybercrimes in the first place are less likely to be reported. Why is that? We know the reasons. There was a study in the UK into this 10 years ago. None of the reasons have changed. We're looking at the shame and guilt that people feel. We're looking at people not trusting the police with these cases, or not feeling like they'll be able to help them, not thinking it's serious enough, and that the police are under-resourced. So why would I report it in the first place? And there's so many different reasons that people won't report. And I think what's really interesting is the way that we have to report them as well. If you look at UK, for example, we have action fraud here. And action fraud takes all reports of cybercrime and fraud. Where that becomes interesting is if you're looking at cases of online harm, stalking, harassment, it utilises technology. So should I be reporting it to action fraud or to my local police? The answer is the local police. But even the local police don't know that a lot of the time. So they're then signposting these cases onto action fraud, which ultimately being no further actioned, as we'll see in a second. So really interesting kind of things there. And I know that there's other countries that rolled out stuff similar to action fraud, but are taking all cases of cybercrime or online harms, anything that utilises technology. So there's a stark difference to how action fraud in the UK operate right now. Just to break that down a little bit more. Every year across England and Wales, we believe there's over 5 million victims of cybercrime and online harms. And it's likely to be much more than that because we don't include things like online grooming in these stats. Equally, majority of our service users are over the age of 18. In fact, 25 to 39 is the most common. So we try to stay in our zone really and not cover kind of that more online grooming angle. Um, so that is excluded from here, but excluding that, these are the cases that we looked into. So, CMA and fraud, 33% of individuals report to the police. For stalking and harassment, that number becomes a bit higher, it's 46%. But where this becomes interesting as well is the length of time that it takes someone to report. Stalking cases can go on for years, and in many cases do. They're defined by fixation, obsession. And what we see is that it actually takes around 100 incidents of stalking before someone will report that crime to the police. And they will only do that at a point where they feel that their life is in danger. They minimize what is happening to them. And, even if for us, we feel that their life could be in danger as a safeguarding concern, to them, that kind of where you draw the line is very different as an individual experiencing it. So whilst the number is higher, we're seeing that it's taking a lot longer to report these crimes. Intimate image abuse, like I said, this was a bit experimental. I do believe this number is probably a lot higher. And what we found here was kind of from submitting freedom of information requests that forces haven't done a great job of figuring out how we measure these crimes, as we'll see. They're not being tagged correctly. And of course, the crime code in the UK around intimate image abuse did change not long ago. So they're not yet all being tagged correctly. But I believe I believe the number of reports are a lot higher experiences and victimizations a lot higher. This does seem to be correct in terms of the number of people reporting sits at around a third. So overall, across categories, we're seeing that less than half of victims and survivors of these crimes do report. I mentioned a few reasons that people might not report, but there's a couple of quotes here from service users who have consented to us providing these that I think really kind of stand out to me of, reasons we don't necessarily think of why people don't report. We think about shame and embarrassment, but there's one here from someone who experienced cyber stalking. And as I mentioned before about action fraud, they talk about reporting everything, going to the police, and sometimes they're being closed within minutes. We'll explore that a little bit more in a second. And they're also finding that the police are passing the issues on to safer neighbourhood teams, to local resolution teams who are just coming out and, checking on our safety. I've actually had cases where neighbourhood police have been involved. They've come out and they're just as frustrated. They're trying to escalate out the chain themselves to get a detective to come out to take the device and look at them. And they're being told, well, you can deal with it, and they're not the tech experts. They're not the people that can get these devices to forensics. She discusses kind of having to make multiple complaints to even get a crime reference number. And I think this crime reference number is really important because what we're seeing in kind of stalking harassment cases, that every single incident is getting a separate crime number. And as I said, if you look at cyber stalking as being something that's repetitive and obsessive, how do we actually realize that that's what's happening, that repetition and obsessiveness is there when we're not delivering those crime reference numbers, or also we're just seeing kind of one crime reference number for every single incident. So they're being treated separately. And she talks about, by the time that this happens, she's worried the evidence could be being edited, deleted, or stolen. And this is a really common scenario. Some of the advice that we're seeing police give victims, in fact, is go and factory reset your device or delete your Facebook account and create a new one. And by doing that, we're removing all of the evidence, which becomes really frustrating when we finally get a police officer, law enforcement officer who wants to do something, who can do something, and everything's gone, so they can't move forward. And that's a really, really interesting kind of area, I think, because when you look at stalking in particular and some harassment cases, if somebody is obsessed with somebody to the point where, they're conducting these behaviors, if you then go and factory reset your device, remove their access to your account, delete your Facebook account, what's their next step going to be? And that is where we see a lot of these cases tend to escalate. So actually, is the advice that law enforcement are given even safe at this stage? Probably not. And it's actually goes against some of the guidelines that officers are provided with. But we still see that it's very common advice given in cybercrime and online harms cases. There's also this aspect of threats as well. And this quote's from somebody who experienced fraud. And similarly, she discusses kind of being threatened around, herself and her children if she told the police. But she also talks about him, or the fraudster, knowing her bank, her home address. So what else does he know? These aren't empty threats. If you don't know who this person is, if you don't know what their capabilities are, how do you know if they're going to know if you report to the police? There's this fog of war around what is kind of malicious versus what is real, what is possible versus what is probable. If somebody says to you, I've got spyware on your device, are you the person who's going to know any different? And are you going to be able to research that? So kind of a really big part of that case as well is demystifying that. Some of kind of the headline statistics from our study here. So we found that around 58% of all crimes in England and Wales involve technology. Again, this excludes online grooming. So I think this number again is actually much higher. But yet investment in online crime is less than 5% of what we're spending on the police. So this is around 5 million victims of cybercrime and online harm, with about 36% actually reporting that to the police. In fact, 87% who do report, though, through action fraud, get immediately no further action decisions. So that is happening, within minutes of them sending the report, they're being told, there's nothing we can do here, case closed. Of those that of that 13% who do end up going further on into the reporting system, 98.1 do eventually end up with a no further action decision anyway, for a number of reasons. It could be that it's not seen as an offence at this stage, there's not enough evidence, there's a number of reasons for that. We do see a little bit of drop off where victims and survivors decide that they don't want to go through the process any further, but that is very minute compared to the amount of cases that are no further actioned, essentially. And then we're also seeing that victims of cybercrime and online harms are 7 times less likely to see a perpetrator charged or summoned as opposed to all other crime types. So in fact, this number is much higher if you compare it directly to offline crimes. What I haven't done here is kind of looked at that number in more detail. So it's 7 times more likely compared to kind of all other crime types. So again, likely to be much higher. Where we struggled a little bit with this was that some of the data was a little bit weird coming from the government, and some of the numbers didn't quite add up between their sources. So we had to do the best with what we had here. But again, I think this is an underestimation at this stage, but as close as kind of we can get right now. So just breaking that down again a little bit more. So let's look at CMA and fraud for a second. So as I mentioned, CMA is Computer Misuse Act. So this is cases of hacked social media accounts, cases of malware on devices, a number of different things here, but not necessarily stalking and harassment, more online harms cases. This is more kind of the technical side of things, so to speak. We don't have very good crime coding in the UK, as I'm sure we don't have across many countries. 1 in every 1,000 CMA and fraud cases actually led to a charge. So less than 1% actually resulted in any kind of formal justice, any charge or summons. You can see kind of the funnel going through here. Of the 3.5 million that were victims and 1.1 million who reported, actually only 20,000 of those were ever investigated. So a very low number here. And then what we're seeing is that kind of when we did look at the data, again, 95% of cases had no actual outcome. And so it hadn't been logged at that time. So we're not keeping up to date on the stats at all. Stalking and harassment, a little bit higher in terms of the number of people we're seeing get formal justice. 3% of crimes happening resulted in some sort of charge. That 66% were closed due to evidential difficulties. That's a really big number. And what we're seeing when we're speaking to law enforcement as kind of people that are liaising with police on a daily basis, the evidential difficulties part is tricky, right? Because of course, internet anonymity. But when you're speaking to police officers every day and you're telling them, an IP address isn't an exact geographical location of that person, and they are surprised at that, it's hard to kind of imagine how many of these evidential difficulties are just a lack of understanding of technology, which is a really kind of difficult thing to battle with, and why I love answering questions so much from police officers who are willing to learn in the UK and the US. but it's something really important, is utilising that curiosity and admitting that no one can be an expert in everything, right? Like I say, we're not experts when it comes to legal stuff. So it's the tech stuff that is our gig. So I think that's a really important kind of piece of this for me. Intimate image abuse, as I said, these were more experimental. We did see a higher, again, increase in charges or summons from these cases. So around 4% had a charge or summons. So the highest of all categories. But I think kind of the numbers here are an underestimate. Again, it's very experimental and a lot of forces haven't yet figured out how they're logging these crimes exactly. So these were all based off of freedom of information requests. So that is 12 out of every 1,000 cases. Um, and of kind of those cases that were reported, 36% identified a suspect, but the victim didn't support further action. So you can kind of see that these cases might be more domestic in nature. There might be coercive control involved. It might be, the parent of their children. So these cases are going to be more likely to have that dropout rate. 23% had evidential difficulties, but the suspect was identified and the victim supported further action. Again, what these evidential difficulties are, I don't know, but I can imagine they're going to be ones that would be, in some cases, quite easily overcome. Of course, there's going to be cases where it's difficult and it's tricky to get that answer, but the majority of cases that we see, through a bit of conversation and collaboration, we can get to the bottom of. So our recommendations from the report were a list of 7 things that we think could be done differently in England and Wales. But actually, as we expand the cyber helpline across the world, I'm thinking more and more this is stuff that we could use everywhere. A fit for purpose reporting system is really important. We need reporting systems that allow individuals to report crimes to the police easily, but they're accessible for everyone, and that they're not going to have a case closed within seconds. In the UK, we have something called the cyber flag, which is essentially any case that involves an element of cyber, a box is ticked. That is not used. In fact, we saw discrepancies between forces between kind of 1% all the way through to 40% of cases being ticked. So we know that they're not being used properly. It requires that manual effort. In terms of taxonomy, we're not in a position where cases are being logged correctly. The majority of cases logged to action fraud in the UK are identified as NFIV40. That always sticks in my mind. And essentially what that means is none of the above. So that is a majority of cases that are being reported that do not fit into any of our crime categories. They are a crime, but they, can't be coded in any way. In terms of investigation capacity, we need to support the police. The police need to be supported in building dedicated capacity to investigate an online crime. We need really a national cybercrime agency. We need something that extends beyond local forces. Cybercrime is not only national, it's international, but when the majority of cases we're seeing having problems with are still within the same country, just maybe different towns, there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. We need to tackle how we handle cases nationally before we look at how we expand that capacity. Training, of course, is really important too. There's a lot that needs to go into there. And of course, multi-agency working. So looking at how law enforcement, private sector, public sector, the third sector can all work together to enhance that collaboration and communication. And ultimately, we need a victim-centric approach. We need to be going out there asking survivors, what could have been done differently in your case? But also looking at the evidence base. There are lots of great initiatives happening around the world, and even within the UK, there's a police force that I've spoken to who do some great stuff around cyber and online harms, but they're not sharing that message out there. We have the College of Policing in the UK, for example, who host a number of projects that are happening around the UK in different forces, and monitor how they're going from an academic point of view, if they're supporting, a decrease in cybercrime and online harms. But they're not putting their own projects forward, so they're not being measured. We don't know whether they're working or not, and they're not being put out there to other forces to adopt as well. So that communication is really important, and we need to work on that evidence base a lot more. So just before I close up, because I know I've gone over a bit, and I thank you all for sticking with me as the last speaker of the day. So just about how we can support you guys and others around the UK. So for victims and survivors, we want to be those people that can help to bridge the gap between the victims and the police. We want to offer that practical support, support with evidence gathering, and of course, online safety in the long run. For those that work with victim survivors directly, we offer collaboration and consultancy on cases, whether that is with advocates working with them, police officers working with them, or working kind of collaboratively and to form kind of a support network around that individual. We have our investigations team, which I spoke about. Our threat intelligence team do a lot of work around data. So if you go to our website and sign up to our newsletter, we're working to kind of get intel out as much as we can. And of course, we offer training and development opportunities. But I appreciate you sticking with me. I popped my email on the screen here. And yeah, please visit our website for more information, or do get in touch if you just kind of have any questions in the future or anything that I can support with. I'm always happy to.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Super insightful as always. And I could, I could chat to you about a lot of those topics you've just raised, but we'll keep that for another day. Teresa has just asked in the comment page whether she could get access to the report you just mentioned.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. And that was something I should have had copied so I could put it in the chat really quickly, because that was what I meant to do. But I will get that right now. I will pop it in the chat so you can access that. It is a long read and it's a lot of my ramblings, but we do thankfully have a snapshot version our marketing team put together, which is a bit less boring than me rambling on.
well, what I'll do as well, I'll just grab that. So if anybody does, is picking up the recording of this, I can always forward it on as well. It is I believe it's a public document anyway, isn't it? So we can
Yeah.
share it. So
It wouldn't
um,
let me put it in the chat, but if you
I got
onto
something in the
just
chat.
us. Yeah, it's
I
gone
got
to the
some.
host and panelists, but not to anyone else specifically.
Okay, I can forward it. I can forward it on. We can do that. So I've just got one question, even though we could talk. Obviously, the UK is one of the key countries that has now got an online safety law under the Online Safety Act. It's still new. We even have our regulator. For those of people in America, we have Ofcom. So I'm going to ask you, Charlotte, thoughts.
I have to be careful with what I say at these things. So, I think that Ofcom were really upfront with us when they found out when they found out themselves they were going to be the regulators. They were very keen to jump on it and figure out what is this landscape that we're dealing with. And we have seen Ofcom doing a lot of consultancy work, speaking to us on a regular basis about what can they do different and how do they do this. The reality is that they have a very limited pool of resources that they can build from. They're meant to be regulating social media companies who are fighting everything to not be regulated. How do you do that? And that is the question that they need to battle with. And we're looking at fines and stuff like that. These are companies that, what a fine's going to do at the end of the day. We need to see kind of criminal charges being brought against social media companies, and those working for them, to really see any impact, I think, in the long run. But I think that, regulation is really important. I think that Ofcom are doing the best that they can with the job they've been given, but there's a massively long way to go. And, it's only kind of collaboration and working together that we can kind of come up with some answers for how can we make this online safety bill and any future bills effective, and what they actually do. I don't think we're quite there with what we've got at the moment, unfortunately.
No, and it's a good answer. And as I say, Ofcom are still new. They're they're fighting a mountain. It is very challenging, and as you say, they're up against corporations who have money and substance. And just for interest, for those of you who might not know, Charlotte touched on a few of the harms there, but in fact, Ofcom have identified 130 online harms. So that just gives the level of what's been identified here in the UK. So that is only going to expand a lot of things as well. I'll certainly share that report to everybody, and obviously people can reach out to me. I know you're on LinkedIn, Charlotte, so please feel free to connect with Charlotte on LinkedIn. Thank you for being our last speaker. Super insightful as always, and you have the honor technically closing our event. So thank you very much. Thank you for, I was going to say staying up late, but at least doing the late dinner for us. I think everybody's found it super interesting and insightful. And
It's a
yeah,
pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. A massive thank you to yourself, Angeline, as well, for arranging this. Yeah, it's been incredible.